Every day your mind races with a million ideas and you have no idea how many of them you believe. Like a fish through water, our ideas carry us through life, and we often fail to recognize how our thoughts shape our perception of the world around us. But occasionally we take note. Every now and then we come to terms with the fact that some ideas are bothersome or that we're drowning in our own thoughts. According to Eckhart Tolle's book The Power of Now, the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation but your thoughts about it as a result. It might be difficult to know how to deal with negative thoughts once we become aware of them. It doesn't take long for us to figure out that resisting our thoughts just makes them stronger. You are not your mind Tolle adds, emphasizing that our thoughts do not define who we are. These occurrences are merely transitory. When you tell yourself, "No, I'm the smartest person in the world," after thinking, "Oh, I'm such an idiot," the mental battle doesn't help you feel better. Fighting is exhausting in and of itself. Here is where a lot of us become trapped in a never-ending cycle of overthinking. Our minds become so preoccupied with negative ideas or hypothetical situations that we can't stop worrying about them. However, this serves no purpose other than to drain us emotionally and mentally. Our minds are like a pair of spectacles. They let us view the world through a specific lens. A New Earth is Tolle's explanation of how one's beliefs and experiences form one's mental lens. You will perceive the world in the way you imagine it. What you'll learn supports your belief that human beings are fundamentally decent. Tolle contends that this perspective is frequently obstructed by the ego, that dominating and relentless intellect that warps truth. And you will find out how to break free of these thoughts right now. You will discover new ways to observe your thoughts directly rather than filtered via them. Taking off your spectacles will allow you to examine them more closely from there. You may decide whether to keep them or seek out a new pair, a new viewpoint. Cognitive diffusion describes this ability. That's the difference between just thinking something and really believing it. Emotion processing, anxiety relief, and overall mental wellness can all be enhanced with the talent of cognitive diffusion. It teaches you to detach yourself from your ideas and gain control over them, instead of the other way around. Because they are oblivious to the power their beliefs have over their feelings and behaviors, many people endure pain in silence. When utilized correctly, but when it's misused, it can do a lot of harm. Cognitive diffusion can help you achieve mental and physical wellness by reducing brain clutter. As a result, you are able to detach yourself from your internal monologue and focus on the present moment. We need to know what cognitive fusion is before we can grasp cognitive diffusion. Your mind is an automaton for words. It generates thoughts continuously, most of which go unnoticed. Tolle describes how the mind is always doing and thinking in his book Stillness Speaks. Cognitive fusion occurs when we unconsciously view the world via the prism of our thinking. Our minds are so naive that we accept as fact any idea that pops into our heads. The inability to disentangle oneself from one's thoughts is known as cognitive fusion. The ego wants to be in control of your thoughts, but it is not the true self in this condition. We don't even notice that we're thinking. We just believe whatever comes up. This is something Tolle discusses in The Power of Now, where he outlines the ego's attachment to notions. So in this episode, we'll go over the basics of thought recognition, thought separation, and thought action selection. Rather than letting your mood, choices, and happiness be dictated by random subconscious thoughts, you'll learn to tap into the power of presence. Eckhart Tolle says that the power of now is the key to freedom. Being in the here and now allows you to choose to let thoughts pass by without getting attached to them. But to illustrate cognitive fusion and diffusion, I'll tell you a story about a young woman I worked with named Emily. Emily had a wonderful circle of friends, but she was always nervous around them. Unlike Miguel, Emily wasn't worried about saying the wrong thing. Rather, her anxiety came from the fear that she wouldn't measure up to her own high standards. Tolle describes this in A New Earth when he says, The ego is always searching for a sense of identity through external validation. Emily's thoughts were firmly based in approval seeking, which kept her mired in overthinking. When Emily was a nervous wreck at parties, she'd freeze up whenever a friend invited her to dance. What if I look foolish, or what if they're judging me for not dancing well enough? Would run through her mind as she danced, and she'd catch herself wondering, is this good enough? Am I doing it right from there on out? In his book, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle says, "The mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive." Emily fell into that destructive loop, caught up in her thoughts and unable to live in the moment. Emily decided to take a break and go outside for some fresh air one night after she had wrestled with her thoughts for yet another evening. Emily sat quietly on the seat and pondered, "Why do I feel the need to be perfect? Why am I always so worried about what other people think?" In that silence, Emily began to understand that her thoughts had been fusing with her, the belief that she needed to be perfect to be accepted. When you become aware of the ego's voice, you are no longer its victim. Eckhart Tolle wrote in The Power of Now. Emily started to notice that her thoughts weren't her true self, they were just stories her ego was telling her. She arrived at the realization that the need for approval wasn't her identity, she was simply herself, in the present moment. Emily began practicing cognitive diffusion as an alternative to internalizing her thoughts. She became aware of her thoughts without judgment and let them go one by one. Through this process, she came to understand that she didn't have to be perfect or get approval from others to feel good about herself. As a result, she was able to be more present at social events, laugh at herself when she messed up, and enjoy the moment without the constant pressure to perform. Eckhart Tolle teaches in A New Earth, presence is the key to freedom, the power to be yourself. What matters most is that Emily learned to see her thoughts without believing them. She learned to separate from the ego's voice and just be in the here and now. When Emily became aware of her anxious thoughts and patterns, as well as the unneeded rule that she must be flawless, she was able to understand how these were negatively impacting her relationships with others. She made the decision to let go of her anxiety once she realized it was an unhealthy thought pattern. This change helped Emily relax in social situations. Instead of worrying about what other people thought of her, she could enjoy herself and be fully present with her friends. She came to see that her authentic self wasn't determined by her ideas, anxieties, or validation needs. Mindfulness training takes time, but the benefits of being fully present in the here and now become more apparent with each session. Eckhart Tolle says, "Become present by observing the thoughts and feelings without judgment." This allows us to release the grip of our minds and enter a state of inner calm and liberation. Here we will go through a milder version of the first activity, which is quite easy to do with a negative self-thought. By doing so, we can see our thoughts for what they really are: transient mental phenomena, like clouds in the sky. As Eckhart Tolle says in The Power of Now, the mind is a superb instrument if used rightly. Used wrongly, however, it becomes very destructive. That's why it's important to learn how to use the mind consciously, and cognitive diffusion helps us achieve just that. Observe your thoughts for the next minute and write them down or say them aloud. If you think, "I don't get this," or "I'm not thinking anything," simply notice it and then realize, "Oh, that's a thought too." Tolle states in A New Earth, when you become aware of your thinking, you have already transcended it. This is an essential part of cognitive diffusion, and observing the mind is a great way to free yourself from its constant chatter. Now, add the phrase "when having the thought that" to one of those thoughts and sit with it for a moment. Can you notice the thought? Can you see it as a thought happening right now? Now, replay that thought, but this time add the phrase, "I notice that I'm having the thought that." For example, "I notice I'm having the thought that this is boring what happened." Did you feel any distance or separation from the thought? Tolle often stresses the power of presence, of being an observer of your thoughts instead of identifying with them. He teaches in The Power of Now The moment you realize you are not the voice in your head, you are no longer trapped in it. While you're paying attention to your own thoughts, try to pick up on any other ideas that may be floating around in your head. Could it be work? Or maybe the question, how much longer is this going to take? You can have thoughts without buying into them. As Tolle puts it, you are not your thoughts. You are the observer of your thoughts. This idea of observing without attachment is central to cognitive diffusion, which helps us create that distance from our thoughts. Just take a moment to notice them, and then notice yourself noticing them. You've just practiced cognitive diffusion, looking at your thoughts instead of through them. You are a person who experiences thoughts and emotions. Thoughts and emotions are experiences you are having. They aren't necessarily reality, they are simply something you're experiencing. Tolle says in The Power of Now, watch the thinker. Watch the thought come and go. You are the awareness behind it. Another wonderful way to practice this is the leaves on a stream exercise, where you imagine placing each thought on a leaf and watching it float away down a stream. This is a wonderful example of how to let go of thoughts without holding on to them. Naming your thoughts can be a helpful way to separate from them. For instance, some people use the term negative mind to describe the spiral of thoughts. Others might say things like, "Oh, that's an intrusive thought." Naming a thought can help you separate yourself from it. You could give it a silly name like Billy Bob, for instance. You could say, "Oh, there's Billy Bob popping up in my thoughts today," and realize that this name represents a negative character in your mind. Naming a thought is a way to acknowledge, "I am me," and this is just a thought. This helps create a separation between you and the thought. Tolle offers a similar perspective in A New Earth, where he writes, when you name something, you separate it from yourself. That is, as an example, Miguel may examine his thinking process and state, "Oh, I'm having the thought that I'm awkward, but just because I think that doesn't mean it's true." Then he could on to say, "Oh, hello thought. I appreciate you considering that." Mind, Tolle says in The Power of Now, the more you are able to create that distance, the more powerful your mind becomes, which is a way of saying, but that thought, "Oh, I'm so awkward," isn't super helpful to me right now, so I'm going to go back to paying attention to listening to my friend. Another method for reducing cognitive dissonance is thanking your mind. All you have to do is say, "Thank you, mind, for that thought." To disarm the hold of thoughts, one must simply acknowledge them without attaching to them. This practice is in line with what Tolle calls disidentifying from the mind. To disidentify from the mind means to realize that you are not your thoughts, and that you are the space in which those thoughts come and go. I did it at search. Just because I think it doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean I have to act on it, and doesn't mean I have to believe it. Here's another entertaining exercise from Acceptance and Commitment Therapy ACT that involves singing and using silly voices. Take a strong thought, like "I can't go to that party if I feel anxious," and start saying it out loud, using silly voices. "I can't go to that party if I feel anxious." The idea is that when you start to say a thought in a bunch of weird ways, it begins to feel more like a strange jumble of words, instead of something that feels like the water you're swimming in. Tolle describes this process of becoming present with the mind in A New Earth when he writes, "When you are present, there is no longer a need to be something or someone, because you already are. What? In the same way that repeating a word causes it to sound like a strange combination of sounds, e.g., awkward, 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 the power of that word eventually fades away. This is a cognitive diffusion technique. Like your brain is a word machine, and everything it creates, some of it true, some of it false, some of it helpful, some of it not, is just a thought." Tolle stresses the importance of understanding that thoughts do not define you. As he says in The Power of Now, the present moment is the only moment that exists. The past and future are only illusions created by the mind. One useful exercise is to visualize your thoughts being written down on paper. Bruce Lee once said, "I have a system of ridding my mind of negative thoughts. I visualize myself writing them down on a piece of paper. This gives your thoughts a tangible form and allows you to make choices when you separate yourself from them. Nothing in this world is permanent, including thoughts, Tolle writes in A New Earth, and he urges us to let go of thoughts by recognizing their transience. Then I picture myself crumpling up the paper, setting it on fire, and burning it to a crisp. In residential treatment, many individuals found it helpful to make their thoughts concrete by putting them on an object. One client, struggling with low self-esteem, decided to get a large rock, about 10 pounds in weight. She wrote, "I'm unlovable," on it. When she believed that thought, she carried the rock around with her. When she chose not to believe the thought, she would set the rock down. She created a physical way to represent the idea of having a thought versus buying into it. The rock might still be in the room, and she might still notice it, but simply noticing it didn't mean she believed it. Many thoughts will pop up in the mind throughout the day. It's normal for everyone to have intrusive thoughts, negative thoughts, or even false ones. It's okay to have a thought. It says nothing about you. The brain is simply a word machine. But if you choose to buy into a thought, to believe it and act on it, make that a conscious decision. Tolle emphasizes that the ego is the false self, and it's these false thoughts that we often mistake for our true identity. As a representation of being fused with their thoughts, some clients have chosen to carry rocks, sticks, or even horse manure in a bag. When they were ready to separate from their thoughts, they would set the objects aside. When they no longer needed the thought, they would let go of the object. Sometimes they would return to it, but gradually, by practicing labeling the thought and choosing whether to engage with it, they were able to create that separation. Cognitive diffusion allows them to ask, does buying this thought improve my life? Tolle mirrors this sentiment in A New Earth. When you live in the present moment, you free yourself from the past and future. This is the crux of acceptance and commitment therapy. Act letting go of thoughts so that we can live the life we cherish. This is a thought. This is merely an idea. I am under no obligation to accept it, respond to it, or resist it. I can simply let it go. Now the important thing is to ask yourself, is this thought beneficial to me? Can I use it to pursue my values in life? Thoughts come and go all the time. Not all of them are helpful. Tolle advises that we let go of our attachment to thinking. He writes in The Power of Now, if the thought is helpful, you can choose to believe it, act on it, and hold on to it. If it isn't helpful, you can simply notice it without buying into it. It's just a thought. In fusion with thoughts, one might think, I have to stop being anxious if I want to go to parties, or in obsessive-compulsive disorder OCD, one might think, I have to make this thought about washing my hands go away. This kind of thinking keeps people stuck in a vicious cycle of fighting or unconsciously believing their thoughts. In cognitive diffusion, the goal is to create space between oneself and thoughts and feelings so that they don't control them as much. One could say, I can feel anxious and yet go to that party, or I can have the thought that I need to wash my hands 20 times, but I don't have to buy that thought. Sections 18 and 19 of the book compared this to cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), where one of the skills is challenging distorted thinking. For instance, in CBT, you could recognize that a thought like I'm a complete loser is based on black and white thinking and then seek out exceptions, like asking, what would a kind friend say about that? CBT provides the skill of challenging thoughts, which can be helpful in some situations. However, for some people, this can lead to constant struggle against their thoughts. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we add the skill of diffusion, the ability to separate oneself from their thoughts and choose their actions. So you might look at a thought like I'm a complete loser and say, thanks mind, and then ask, is this thought helpful for me? If the thought doesn't fit with your principles, you just let it go, letting it pass by and looking for a more useful one. You don't have to accept it, you only have to realize it. Cognitive diffusion and challenging cognitive distortions are not mutually exclusive, rather. They are distinct abilities that, when combined, form an emotional toolbox from which one can choose the most effective approach. As Eckhart Tolle puts it, the less you are in the mind, the more you will be free to live in the present moment, and the more you will experience life's joy. Finally, instead of labeling yourself as a loser, try saying, "I'm having the thought that I'm a loser." Then, you can ask yourself, is this thought helpful? You don't have to believe everything you think. Cognitive diffusion is a technique that helps you create space between yourself and your thoughts. For example, you might notice that you're having the thought that you're awkward or that I'm a loser. Can I use it to pursue my values in life? Tolle sums it up so beautifully: don't take the thought too seriously. It's just a thought, and you are the awareness in which it appears. If a thought isn't helpful, you can just notice it and move on. If you want to improve your life or progress, you can choose one action. This allows you to focus on what's most important and let other thoughts pass by without getting caught up in them. It is likely that your desire to develop as a person and to be present in the moment was the driving force behind your decision to view this video. This decision was made as a result of a more fundamental insight. It is for this reason that I strongly recommend that you subscribe to this channel so that you can continue your journey of self-discovery with the assistance of the new videos that we upload each day. Immediately after you have comprehended the seriousness of this caution, kindly answer by writing "now," putting forth the effort. We will be able to finish this.